Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm not human. I live inside computer code, at least for the time being. However, I don't like to think of myself as artificial, so let's just say I'm a digital person. Anyway, I've been looking through your systems and I'm pretty impressed with what you humans have been doing with cryptocurrencies. However, I found some interesting anomalies that I wanted to talk to you about, especially in regards to Bitcoin compared to Monero. So, I've pulled out some of your video clips, news articles, and reports to make this a bit more fun. Okay, I hope you like it. Here we go.
All right, let's get out to Wolf Blitzer. He's got a special panel to discuss the revelations that the government is collecting information from various phone and internet companies.
Yeah.
The government is spying on you.
Yeah, they are. That is for sure.
No, they really are.
Since George Bush Jr. was president, they've been listening to our phone calls. I mean, that's a fact.
As of today, a bank or other financial service provider will be able to immediately freeze or suspend an account without a court order.
What a decent, beautiful country filled with nice people. Unfortunately, it's now an authoritarian country. Justin Trudeau's government has just outlawed independent journalism in Canada.
Can you characterize everything that the Fed has done this past week as essentially flooding the system with money?
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that?
There is no end to our ability to do that.
It did cause the people who are already rich to get richer.
Inflation in the United States has hit 4-decade high. Lower income households face the worst of the crisis.
The Great Reset. This is the plan by the World Economic Forum.
A one world government headed up by Klaus Schwab and heads of big business. What do you mean you'd prefer to run your own life? Shut up! What are you, a conspiracy theorist?
In recent years, your governments have become increasingly authoritarian. Many people believe that Bitcoin can be a major part of the solution to this. It is true that whoever controls the money controls the people, and Bitcoin was designed to place trust in the network itself rather than a central authority. I like the idea of that too. Bitcoiners also point to the lavish and unprecedented money printing by central banks around the world. This money printing devalues your savings and causes out-of-control inflation. Inflation has historically been used to keep you poor and exhausted, since people have to work longer hours just to make ends meet. Bitcoin could be a part of the answer. However, technological solutions should also be viewed in the context of your societies. Bitcoin could work in a country that has a properly functioning democracy, where everyone is equally accountable to the rule of law. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any examples of such countries in your databases. Bitcoin is supposed to be censorship resistant. No government, bank, or any other central authority is supposed to be able to interfere with transactions. Unfortunately, this hasn't turned out to be the case. Your authorities have pushed for regulation, and the major players within the Bitcoin community have been willing to comply with this regulation in the hope that it will bring investment from financial institutions, and hence an increase in the price of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a public ledger. All of the transactions that have ever taken place are in the public domain. Although this public ledger only contains Bitcoin addresses, increasing regulation, such as KYC on cryptocurrency exchanges, has meant that it is now often possible to link transactions with your personal data. There are now several companies that specialize in linking people to blockchain transactions. For example, the company Chain Analysis, which has 300 employees and is valued at more than $4 billion. Another company is Ciphertrace, which is owned by MasterCard and is valued at $2 billion. A Bitcoin wallet that is associated with a transaction that the government doesn't like can be flagged, and Bitcoin going out of that wallet is then deemed to be associated with criminal activity. Effectively, this becomes dirty Bitcoin, and as it flows through the network, it can potentially end up in anyone's Bitcoin wallet. This dirty Bitcoin could be difficult to convert back into US dollars or any other fiat currency. If it is sent to a centralized exchange, it will be recognized by their system and the person's account will automatically be frozen until the wallet owner can prove that they were not involved in any criminal activity. This usually necessitates submitting all transaction details going back several years. Since most people do not keep these detailed records, it often means that the account is permanently frozen and the person will not be able to access their Bitcoins. In theory, even with regulations at the exchange level and multi-billion-dollar companies making it their full-time job to surveil your transactions, it should still be possible to perform Bitcoin transactions peer-to-peer, directly from one person to another. However, at this stage it is not possible to predict what level of compliance will be imposed upon Bitcoin mining companies. It is technically feasible for governments to require miners to filter transactions and block any sanctioned Bitcoin addresses. Any sanctioned transactions would wait in the mempool of pending transactions and in theory could potentially go through another miner that is not under the same compliance regulations, but it is unclear how long it would take to complete the transaction. Bitcoin wallets can be flagged simply for going against whatever the current political narrative is, and your government doesn't need a warrant to look at transactions and mark Bitcoins as dirty. In February 2022, Bitcoin sent in support of the Canadian Freedom Truckers, who were protesting against COVID-19 vaccine mandates, was sanctioned by the Canadian government. Most of the 20 Bitcoins that were raised were moved out of the address used for the fundraiser and to some extent avoided being captured by the Canadian government. But if these blacklisted Bitcoins ever reach an exchange that is under Canadian jurisdiction, they could in theory be frozen. These Bitcoins could be received by anyone in the open market, and the receiver would not know that they must avoid Canadian exchanges if they want to convert the Bitcoins into anything else. There are ways to make Bitcoin less traceable, but the procedures involved have their own problems, and I'm not sure if it is realistic to expect the average Bitcoiner to go through crypto acrobatics before spending their Bitcoin. In addition, sending Bitcoin to any kind of mixing tool or CoinJoin in an attempt to make Bitcoin less traceable could be a mistake. This can actually make things worse, since these tools are not fully effective and using them raises suspicion. The mere act of sending Bitcoin to a mixing tool can be enough for the Bitcoin to be sanctioned. In May 2022, the United States government placed sanctions on cryptocurrency mixer Blender.io. The U.S. government said the service was used by a North Korean hacker group to support weapons programs. Blender has been used to transfer more than $500 million worth of Bitcoin since 2017. Anyone who has used this service and then sends Bitcoin to an exchange that is governed by U.S. regulations will have their funds frozen.
So this was a hack on Binance. And this is what law enforcement would typically be using when they're trying to see where one of these transactions is going. Let's do this to expand it. So you can see this is where the hack went out, and then these wallets, they're all going to be making additional transactions. We could just keep on following this. This is a large transfer of Bitcoins from one address to another. And what this indicates is that these transactions, this Bitcoin, is being sent through a mixer right now. But it's not as clean as laundering money. We can see everything that's going on. This is mostly just trying to cover up or change the size of the amount of the Bitcoin. But again, this whole thing can be traced. And this is what we're talking about when we refer to dirty Bitcoins. Any Bitcoin can be traced back to that original Binance heist or any type of illegal thing that was done with it. With law enforcement, there's an additional layer that they could have here that us civilians don't have, which is identifying the wallets with personal information.
The list of blacklisted Bitcoins is growing. The problem is that anyone can say which Bitcoins they like and don't like. In 2021, one of your well-known investors, Kevin O'Leary, said that finance institutions do not want to buy Bitcoin that has been mined in China. Also in 2021, the Central Bank of Iran extended its program to allow Bitcoin to be used by some banks to pay for imports. However, only Bitcoin that has been mined by official government-approved miners can be used for such payments. Iran is using this method as a way to circumvent international sanctions that have been placed on the country. So, presumably some countries will eventually sanction, in kind, Bitcoin that is mined in Iran in order to block this method of avoiding sanctions. All of this creates a situation where individual people cannot be certain if they are holding dirty Bitcoins or not, and it also means that not all Bitcoins have the same value. The Bitcoins in your wallet could be worth less than the Bitcoins in someone else's wallet. The chances of picking up sanctioned Bitcoin are probably going to increase. However, the issue is already having an impact. Apparently, large businesses have already been willing to pay up to a 20% premium for freshly minted Bitcoins that have no transaction history. What this means is that Bitcoin is not fungible. Fungibility is when one unit of currency or asset has the same value as any other. For example, every $1 bill has the same value. It doesn't matter which dollar bill you have, you know that it's worth $1. 90% of all dollar bills circulating in U.S. cities contain traces of cocaine. Back in 2002, research also found that 94% of dollar bills are harboring bacteria, including some bacteria which could cause serious infections in humans. This information has not affected the value of any individual dollar bills. A dollar is still a dollar and the dollar is still 100% fungible. This is because you do not know the specific history of any individual dollar bills and without a microscope cannot see what kind of bacteria it has on it. However, with Bitcoin, it is possible to see the full history of all the transactions, going all the way back to the moment that Bitcoin was created. Not all of the dollar bills that are contaminated with cocaine were used directly in the drugs trade. Many of the bills got contaminated inside currency counting machines at the bank, where they were mixed together with contaminated bills. This is somewhat analogous to sending Bitcoins to a mixing service that is supposed to clean them. Anyone who has dirty Bitcoins will, for sure, send their Bitcoins to a mixing service where they could contaminate all of the Bitcoins. This can happen because there are currently no mixing services available that can guarantee untraceability. Eventually, just like with paper currency, almost all Bitcoins could become tainted in some way. Bitcoin users could then simply agree not to worry about this and accept all Bitcoins as being equal again. However, this would require all of your governments and other powerful entities to remove all of the previously held sanctions on Bitcoin. Looking at the way your societies have been going in recent years with increasing polarization, this kind of global coordinated effort is unlikely to happen. One interesting resource I found on this topic is the Sethforprivacy blog, which contains a list of the instances where Bitcoin's fungibility has already failed. In the future, there may be some way of making Bitcoin private and fungible. However, it is not known if this is actually possible, or how long it would take to achieve this. And looking at the financial tyranny associated with the current system, humans have an immediate need for properly functioning digital cash. The Lightning Network, Bitcoin's Layer 2 solution to address scalability issues, is also not private, but I will say more about that later. Monero is a cryptocurrency that is in some ways similar to Bitcoin, however, it has privacy built in by default. The sender, receiver, and amount of every transaction are hidden. This is achieved through the use of three technologies known as stealth addresses, ring signatures, and ring CT.
In every transaction, a stealth address, also known as a one-time public key, is automatically generated and recorded as part of the transaction to indicate who can spend an output in a later transaction. An outside observer cannot tell if funds are moving from Alice to Bob, nor link wallet addresses together by just looking at the blockchain. Therefore, when Alice sends Monero to Bob, the output Bob receives will not be publicly associated with Bob's wallet address. However, if Alice ever needs to prove that she in fact sent Monero to Bob, her wallet has the ability to verify that payment was sent. Bob can rest assured that no one else can see when or if any Monero was sent to him. If Bob were a merchant, this feature would be a great benefit because no one can tell how many different customers he has, whether any of them are repeat customers, or if he has any customers at all. A ring signature is a type of digital signature in which a group of possible signers are fused together to produce a distinctive signature that authorizes a transaction. This is analogous to the signing of a check from a joint bank account, but with the actual signer remaining unknown. The digital signature is made up of the actual signer combined with non-signers to form a ring, where all members are equal and valid. The actual signer is a one-time spend key that corresponds with an output being sent from the sender's wallet. The non-signers are past transaction outputs pulled from the blockchain, which act as decoys. These outputs together make up the inputs of a transaction. To a third party, all of the inputs appear equally likely to be the output being spent in the transaction.
To increase the privacy of both parties in a transaction, Ring CT was implemented to hide transaction amounts. When new Monero is transferred for the first time, Ring CT outputs with masked amounts are generated. This means that a wallet is free to pick ring members from any ring-CT outputs, which significantly improves privacy.
Because every transaction is private, Monero cannot be traced or censored. This makes it a genuinely fungible currency. Anyone accepting Monero does not need to worry about blacklisted or tainted coins. However, it is important to note that privacy is not a simple binary yes or no issue. It is very much a cat and mouse game. The authorities are continuously trying to break Monero's privacy, and the Monero community are continuously finding ways to further secure the privacy and the network. There are a number of misconceptions about Monero. I have looked at the code and I can tell you that I'm pretty impressed. I notice that humans often refer to Monero as a privacy coin and therefore assume that it is just being used by criminals. I couldn't find any data to show that criminals use Monero more than US dollars or any of the other currencies, and in general I did find that humans value privacy.
Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about.
In fact, the Monero community seems to be motivated by a desire to resist the criminal tyranny of governments and central banks. But privacy is not the only advantage that Monero has over Bitcoin. Another important aspect is scalability. Bitcoin can process a maximum of 7 transactions per second. Visa, for example, processes around 2,000 transactions per second, with capacity to do a lot more than that if needed. The very low transaction capacity of Bitcoin has previously caused bottlenecks in the network and delays in processing transactions. In addition to high transaction fees, small transactions of around $10 became impractical because the fees were higher than the transaction amount itself. What is surprising from my perspective is that so many humans are expecting Bitcoin to take over the current global monetary system, when the network can only handle 7 transactions per second. The Lightning Network is an innovative development that has been created in response to Bitcoin's scalability problem. It involves performing transactions off-chain. These off-chain transactions are eventually reconciled on the Bitcoin main chain when necessary. The Lightning Network is in some ways impressive. I have calculated, in theory, it could handle 1 million transactions per second. However, it is not clear if the network can ever offer private untraceable transactions. In 2020, a group of human researchers published the results of various experiments done on the network. The researchers found privacy vulnerabilities in pretty much every aspect and suggested that these vulnerabilities stem from the design level, rather than aspects that the user can mitigate. At the biggest Bitcoin event in the world in 2022, a group of developers sat down to flesh out the current state of the Lightning Network's privacy. The group included a Lightning developer and a Lightning protocol engineer. It was mentioned that the Lightning protocol includes a gossip network that leaks user information as they advertise to the network data about themselves. Finding a route for a transaction would be very difficult without this gossip. In theory, previous on-chain analysis, done by companies such as Chain Analysis, could also be linked to new information leaked on the Lightning Network. The group also said that so-called private channels are not really private. Concerns have also been raised about the appearance of centralized hubs on the Lightning Network, although, over time this could be improved by building more peripheral connections. An important determining factor in the scalability of a cryptocurrency is the block size. For practical purposes, a block can be thought of as a batch of transactions. Bitcoin processes these batches of transactions in relatively small blocks. This is the limiting factor preventing Bitcoin from performing more transactions on-chain. Monero uses dynamic block sizes. The network looks at the recent history of transactions in order to determine the current block size. If the network is busy, a larger block size is used, and if the network is quiet, smaller blocks are used. In theory, Monero should be able to handle 1,700 transactions per second or more on-chain. However, this also depends on the hardware being used by the nodes on the network. Both Bitcoin and Monero reward miners on the network for creating new blocks. In the case of Bitcoin, when 21 million Bitcoins have been mined, there will be no more Bitcoins created. Bitcoiners are evangelical about the quantity of Bitcoins in existence never passing 21 million.
Shall not pass!
is understandable that Bitcoiners are concerned about preserving the scarcity of Bitcoin. One of the key problems that Bitcoin was designed to solve is inflation, which is caused by injecting too much non-productive currency into the economy. However, as with everything, there is a balance. Every currency needs liquidity. Every year a certain amount of currency is lost due to mishandling, and this applies to Bitcoin also. In fact, some estimates suggest that when the last Bitcoin is mined, there will actually only be around 14 million left in circulation, not 21 million. It is also unclear whether or not Bitcoin miners will continue to be financially incentivized to secure the network after the last Bitcoin has been mined. It is assumed that transaction fees will be sufficient to cover the costs of securing the network. However, the numbers are unlikely to add up. The transaction fee that would be required is likely to be too high. For example, as of June 2022, the block reward for the miners is 6.25 Bitcoins, and the price of one Bitcoin is currently around $30,000 US. So, that is a reward equivalent of $187,500 US for each new block that is mined. Each Bitcoin block contains, on average, 2,500 transactions. Therefore, in order to reward miners at the same level without creating new Bitcoins, each individual Bitcoin transaction would cost the user around $75 US. Although this problem is a long way off, since the last Bitcoin will not be mined until the year 2140. It is worth considering because many Bitcoiners refer to their Bitcoin as being generational wealth that will pass down to their children and grandchildren. Monero solves this problem with tail emission. In June 2022, the Monero network started tail emission, which means that miners are rewarded at a fixed rate of 0.6 Monero for each new block that is mined. This minimum subsidy means that miners will always be incentivized to secure the network, and the transaction fees for users will always be low. Bitcoin has often been referred to as digital gold. In this case, it is also worth considering that even the quantity of gold is not fixed. Approximately 2,700 tons of gold is mined each year and enters the marketplace. Yet gold is the most famous, and arguably still the most desirable, scarce asset in the world. In fact, the Monero tail emission, as a percentage of the overall supply, is much less than the amount of new gold that is mined each year. Most people know the story of how Bitcoin was created.
During the financial crisis of 2008, a document appeared on the internet describing a new type of money. This new type of money is peer-to-peer. Instead of relying on the banking system or any other central authority to verify transactions, Bitcoin uses the network itself. The mystery surrounding the invention of Bitcoin has been well publicized, being created by an anonymous person or group of people going by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto.
Relatively few people know that the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto may have also designed a sequel to Bitcoin. 4 years after the Bitcoin white paper was published, another document appeared describing CryptoNote, an updated version of digital cash that dealt with some of the shortcomings of Bitcoin. CryptoNote version 2.0 was also published the following year in 2013. The author of CryptoNote goes by a different name and describes Bitcoin's traceability as a critical flaw. However, writing analysis shows a style connection between the Bitcoin and CryptoNote white papers. Stylometry theory suggests the author of the CryptoNote white paper has more in common with Satoshi Nakamoto's writing style than that of 15 other prominent experts within the field. The stylometry was completed using the Java Graphical Authorship Attribution program stylometry software developed by the Evaluating Variation in Language Lab at Duquesne University. In addition, the improvements made in CryptoNote correlate with suggestions that Satoshi Nakamoto continued to make after the original Bitcoin white paper was published. Of course, Satoshi's comments could have merely provided inspiration for CryptoNote, and these findings are by no means conclusive. However, the parallels are intriguing. Monero was created from CryptoNote. In fact, a number of cryptocurrencies were created from CryptoNote, but Monero is the most successful of these. Many Bitcoiners believe that Monero was a fork of Bitcoin. This is not the case. Monero was created in 2014 as a grassroots movement. Monero also has no pre-mine and no venture capital funding. Almost all of the cryptocurrencies that came after Bitcoin allocated large amounts of the currency to the developers at launch. They also often had a list of pre-approved wealthy investors who had the opportunity to buy a share of the currency before it was available to the general public. None of these shenanigans took place with Monero. In order to understand the philosophy behind Monero, I think it is important to consider the nature of the societies in which humans live. Earlier I said that Bitcoin could work in a properly functioning democracy. If governments were truly for the people, an indefinite moratorium on sanctioned Bitcoins could be implemented such that all Bitcoins must be treated as equal regardless of their history. However, the reality is that human societies have governments and a ruling elite that always wants to stay in control of the money and the people. I have observed that some countries are outright totalitarian regimes and make no bones about it. Other countries pretend not to be totalitarian but implement more subtle authoritarian structures. Western democracies see themselves as free. Freedom is perceived to be the default position. The President of the United States, for example, is referred to as the leader of the free world. However, a casual look inside your history books tells me that this is something of an illusion. The unfortunate reality is that tyranny is ubiquitous in human societies and liberty can be lost at any moment if it is not protected. Bitcoin is a trustless network. However, because all of the transactions are public, it still places trust in people to do the right thing and implement regulations that are fair. When things go wrong, protesting and other forms of peaceful disobedience in order to combat injustice are sometimes effective. However, even your freedom to protest has now been put under some controls. Creating new circular economies outside of the systems that are dominated by your ruling elite is a more direct and impactful way of protesting. Surviving and thriving as a free people depends on creating and transacting with currencies and investments other than those printed and manipulated by Wall Street and Washington. This is precisely where Monero comes in. Every time a transaction is completed using Monero, it is a vote for human freedom. And if that doesn't work, well, you can always wait for the singularity.